Welcome, everybody, back to the Era of Seaweed Brain podcast, where we speak to the incredible cast and creatives involved in making season 1 of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Today, we are being joined by an excellent brand new special guest, the epic Jules O'Loughlin, director of photography. Stick around. Welcome, Jules. You DP'd episodes 3, 4, and 7 of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Erica. Great to be talking to you guys. Great to you as well, Carter. Let's talk about Percy Jackson.
Yeah, this is the part of the podcast where we bombard you with questions about your life and your career.
Let's go.
You have worked on many projects that are near and dear to our heart, not just Percy Jackson. You were on season 1 of C on Apple TV, which our listeners know is like one of the most important seasons of television to me ever. You also worked on Miss Marvel. You obviously worked on Black Sails. DP, it stands for Director of Photography, also sometimes called Cinematographers.
That's right.
This is not necessarily a role that everybody who listens to our podcast is familiar with. So when did you learn about what a DP was and you were like, this is it, this is the thing I'm going to do in TV and film?
Well, yeah, I mean, I learned about it when I was still at school, and I didn't really know what, director of photography was. I was, from an early age, from the age of 7, actually, my father gave me my first camera. We went on a European vacation with many of my siblings. I'm the youngest of 10 children. And
Whoa!
The youngest of 10. And my eldest brother was rowing in the World Cup in Lucerne in Switzerland. And it was back in, when was it? This is going to age me, 1976. And there were about 8 of us siblings that went. 2 of them didn't because they were older and they were doing other things. And we went for this trip through Europe. And at the end of it, we rocked up in Lucerne to watch my brother row in the World Cup. But my father gave me a camera, and so I started taking photographs at quite a young age, and became very interested in photography, and then fell in love with movies. And at some stage, I don't know when it was, but it was probably my late teens that I started to think about photography and movies, and like who does the photography on a movie, and it's this person called the cinematographer, and so that's when I became interested in it. But it wasn't until my late 20s, I guess, that I actually decided that I might go into the film industry and pursue this idea of becoming a cinematographer. I left school and I did other things. I had a career as in the financial markets, and I put myself through law school, and I did various things. My father was a great supporter of the arts, but he was that old school. You got to get a degree, you got to become a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. And so I came to cinematography kind of late. I went to film school, the first film school I went to, I think when I was 31. And then I went to the National Film School in Sydney, the Australian Film, Television, Radio School, when I was 33, I think I was. So I came to the film industry a little later in life.
Oh, that's great. Did any of your other 9 siblings end up in the arts? I'm so curious.
Well, one of my sisters is an artist. She's a painter. But that, let me think, because I've really got to think about it, because there's a lot of them, right? No, so I'm the only one that ended up in the film industry. But she is an artist, and that's about it. But the rest of them, doctors and lawyers and all that kind of jazz.
Classic youngest sibling, I'm going to pivot and do the arts.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And from this decision to start working in film and this interest in photography, when did you become involved in the Schatzberg cinematic universe, as Daphne once coined it?
What is it? The
Schatzberg cinematic universe?
I love it. So in around 2012, I think it was, or 2011, I shot a film called Wish You Were Here, which got into the Sundance Film Festival.
Wow.
And it got me a little bit of notice, kind of on the international scene. I got a US agent. And another cinematographer, Lucas Etland, was actually setting up Black Sails. He was involved in the early stages of Black Sails with Dan, and he was looking around for a partner. So what happens in the movie world is that there is usually one cinematographer or one director of photography. But in TV, and especially the bigger TV shows, there are two. And what we do is we leapfrog. So I might be shooting episode 1, and the other cinematographer will be prepping episode 2. And then when he or she goes and shoots episode 2, then I'd start prepping for episode 3. And so we kind of tend to leapfrog. It's not always the case in TV. Sometimes you do have a single cinematographer that shoots the entire show. But often on the bigger ones, like Black Sails, you'll have 2. And so Lucas was looking around for a partner, someone to work with him and work on the show and leapfrog with him as the alternate DP. And he saw my film Wish You Were Here. And he also saw the first film that I shot back in Australia, which was a war film called Kokoda. And he loved what I had done with those films, and he gave me a call and interviewed me, and the rest is history. And so that was my first foray out of Australia and into international TV and movies. So, and I think, what was that, 2013 that we shot the first season of Black Sails. So, and that was as you know, it was in South Africa, in Cape Town, and I did 2 seasons on Black Sails. And then subsequently went on to do C with Dan Schatz and John Steinberg, the 2 showrunners. And then after C, it was The Old Man and season 1, and then Percy, of course, and now season 2 on The Old Man. So I've been part of the family for quite a few years.
Absolutely. And that leapfrogging, I'm guessing that's because of the schedule of TV and how fast it goes.
Well, it's the schedule, but also often the complexity. Black Sails was a really big show, and a lot of visual effects, a lot of big action sequences, a lot of everything really. And so I guess it's always schedule driven, but it's also the complexity of the show and being able to prep your upcoming episode, often with a new director. I mean, I have done a TV show where I was the only DP, and it's pretty full on. You know, you're shooting, and then you start to prep the next episode while you're shooting, and then you might have a new director come in, and it's a lot of work. And I think, you know, depending on the size of the show, you can really get stretched. And the beauty of leapfrogging is that you go into those eps fully prepped, knowing what you're going to do. And then it gives you the ability then to work really quickly and to work really effectively.
Do you think that you can say a little bit more about what that collaboration looks like, particularly in the context of Percy Jackson? Like, what were the things that were standardized across? What were the areas where the two of you might have been more independent in the decision-making and crafting process?
Yeah, so on Percy Jackson, my fellow DP was Pierre Gill. To answer your question about, you know, the collaboration between 2 cinematographers and where you kind of pair off. So I guess the most important thing is that you both have to be making the same show, you know, and that comes down to poring over reference material, working with the production designer, who was Dan Hanna, as to what the look of the show is, and also heavily involved in that, of course, John Steinberg and Dan Schatz, the 2 showrunners. So the really important thing is that you're going on this journey, and you need to be traveling the same path, more or less. There's a roadmap to how the show should look, or generally how all the creatives want it to look. Because the thing about television, it's really interesting. It's quite different to shooting a movie where you have a director who's really at the apex of the creative kind of aspects of the show, how it ostensibly looks. You know, that's what I'm interested in as a cinematographer. How does it look? And the director is invariably driving a lot of those decisions. But on a TV show, you've got a lot more people in the pot making the decisions, you know, and you've got a couple of showrunners. You've also got the directors coming in. You've got the DPs, 2 DPs, the production designer. So in a way, it's a bit more of a collaboration in the sense of working with more people to find what that roadmap is and then to go on that journey. So Pierre and I had to I could sit down and work out what the look of the show was and which direction it takes. And that was the most important thing for me. But Pierre kicked off the show. Pierre did eps 1 and 2. I was 3 and 4. And then within your episodes, you can, of course, branch off and you can go down, what I call side alleys, but as long as you're still coming back to that main pathway. And that comes through working with a new director, talking about things that you may want to do differently. There may be, like, for instance, there was some lensing that I did on eps 3 and 4, and then again in 7, where I deviated from our standard lenses called anamorphics, which were the main lenses of the show. And I brought in specialty lenses to do particular scenes. There was a flashback scene of young Percy in the pool. Remind me, guys, what episode was that?
The beginning of episode 4.
Yeah, the beginning of episode 4, right? So for that, I wanted, thank you. So for that, I wanted a slightly different look. And so I brought in some Blackwing spherical lenses to shoot, young Percy in the pool, because I just wanted to give it a slightly different, slightly kind of nostalgic kind of look to it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so that's just one example where you can go off piste, and travel a different road for part of it. But it's a lot of fun when you are working with another DP, because it's really rare otherwise for us DPs, unless you're working with a second unit director of photography. It's not often that we get to work with other cinematographers. And that's one of the aspects of TV that I really love, is being able to work with another cinematographer. So, yeah, a lot of fun.
That's so cool. The thing about the different lens for the nostalgic flashback is so cool. You worked a lot on fantasy projects, like the ones we listed earlier. And obviously Percy Jackson it's a bit of a fantasy show. It's a bit of a kid's show. Is there anything in the language of the photography and setting up the shots, or like any DP secrets to like what it means to shoot a fantasy show, or something that is a little bit more like high fantasy, where there's magical elements and you're creating this like big sweeping fantastical world?
It's all driven by story, right? It's all driven by the script, and whether it's fantasy or drama or a war film or what have you, it all starts with those words on the page. But I guess, and I would say this, it was important for Dan and John to keep Percy grounded, that this world, that it wasn't going to go into kind of ultra real kind of fantasy world, that it had to to a great extent, it had to feel real, and we had to keep the show grounded. And of course we go into fantastical worlds like Hades, the Underworld. It's fantasy, but at the same point, it was always important that we didn't go too far with the lighting and the photography to make it too fantastical. But I guess when it comes to fantasy, the first thing, as a cinematographer, we are ostensibly responsible for the lighting on a movie or a TV series. That's, we're responsible for the photography, which includes the camera work, but also the lighting. And lighting is, I guess, one of the more important aspects of fantasy is how you light the show, and how beautiful or how fantastical or how surreal it is really is driven a lot by how you light the show. So, but yeah, I mean, there were times where, we could really push the envelope, and there are times where, a lot of the time, where you've got to keep it in control, and you've got to keep the show grounded in the real world.
That makes perfect sense. That sense of the groundedness in reality is what makes Percy Jackson Percy Jackson. So it was really cool to hear you say that was like a conversation that was had across the production team.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, there were a few things that I tried in post in the grading of Percy. So once you shoot the movie or the show and it's cut together, they do the edit and they do the sound and all that. What we do as cinematographers, we come back and we time the film, or we color the film, or grade the film. And there are a few things that I tried in post, for instance, putting a sun flare in at a particular moment. And then Dan would say, listen, it's just, you know what, like don't do that, because it feels without that, it feels more grounded. Like there was a scene when they're going past the Talia tree, okay, and they're starting out on their quest. And the time of day, it just felt a little too kind of middle of the day. You know what I mean? And I just wanted, I guess, to give it a little bit more of a fantasy aspect. You know, as they're crossing the point where they're leaving Camp Half-Blood and they're going into the world and they're going on this quest. And so I introduced like a digital sun and a flare. And I spoke to Dan about that, and he said, "You know what? It's like John. I really like the fact that it's just like a normal sunny day, you know, and to bring in that flare, it didn't feel grounded anymore when you did that." And I went, "Okay, cool, not a problem. Let's lose the flare, let's lose the sun." And that's that thing where sometimes you want to vibe it with something a little bit more fantastical, and I guess it's knowing when to do that and when to not, and also to have the steady hands of someone like, you know, Dan, to go, you know what, let's not do that, because at this point I just want to keep it real, just want to keep them in the real world at this moment. And so it's a dance. It's often a dance, and these conversations happen on set as well while you're shooting. Yeah. You try something, or you light in a particular way, and it's not often. But Dan will come up and say, "Listen, why are you doing that?" "I'm doing it for this particular." "Oh, okay, I get it. That's a really good, you know, that's a really good reason to be doing this." Or other times it's like, "Yeah, maybe you consider this." "Okay, sweet." And so it's a constant kind of collaboration. Mm-hmm. That's what filmmaking is. So.
Gosh, that's just so cool. I have a feeling our listeners are going to be like, "Oh my God, they cut one lens flare." Like that's how specific the work is. And that's how specific like Dan and John are. It's amazing. Like the confidence and the specificity of the vision you have to be a showrunner is so impressive to me. I think we want to talk to you about episode 3 in particular, because we loved episode 3. We were like shook by episode 3, everything about the writing, the style, the production, the costumes, and it looked so incredible. There were many times when the first time Carter and I, we like got on a Zoom or like a Zencaster link and we watched the screeners together, just the two of us. And we were like, we had to pause during episode 3 and be like, wow, this is beautiful. Like the way that she is sitting, that Jessica Parker Kennedy is sitting in this chair, it makes her look alone. And she also looks like a statue, and she's in her living room, but the living room is so big and it's so dark, and it looks like she wants people to be there because there's food everywhere and it's so cozy, but at the same time, she looks so lonely. We would love to hear like anything you have to share about setting up those shots in Medusa's house in episode 3, especially given what you just said about how to keep it grounded and not too fantastical when we get into this space that is like, okay, it's just a normal, nice, maybe 1950s home, but at the same time, it is also like a monster lair.
Yeah, that's right. It was what was it called? The Gnome Emporium, I think, was her establishment or her house. And Jessica, of course, who we worked with on Black Sails and on The Old Man. She was in The Old Man season 1 and is back for season 2. So she is awesome. We love Jess. Jessica, of course, being Medusa. There was the little dance of how much do we show? How much do we show of her face? Mm-hmm. How much do we show of her hair? Which is really, it was her eyes and her hair were the two critical things. How much does the audience get to see of this? And it was a discussion. You know, it was about it all starts with costume. What are we going to put Jess in? What's the costume designer? What are the ideas behind this? How much of her face do we see? And then the type of veil that she has over her face. How translucent is it when I'm photographing it? You know, how much of her eyes will I be able to see or not see? And also the way it fell on her face as well. Medusa's looking out the window. You know, we want to be over her left shoulder. So does the veil have to fall to the left or to the right? How much of her face do we get to see? All this stuff you've got to know before the day, before you turn up on set, because once you start shooting, it's got to be fast, you know. So a lot of decisions have to be made beforehand. So, yeah, I mean, that was one of the big challenges, was the reveal, you know. but also the challenge of the location, because we shot the Emporium that was on location.
Right, and it was an actual house.
It was an actual house. It was outside of Vancouver. It was a single road to get into. So logistically, it was quite difficult because, there's a lot of crew and there's a lot of trucks and there's a lot of equipment. We also had bears at that location. Yeah, and several times there were bear sightings, and one of the bears actually ended up in the back of one of the electric trucks. So there's this fabulous photo that we have a bear lying amongst all these lighting cables. But the difficulty of that location, for me, it was very, very challenging outside with controlling light. So we had some really large trees outside. We were shooting there for a couple of days, and when you shoot scenes over a couple of days, as a cinematographer, you have to somehow control the light because you need lighting continuity. And so that was really challenging because we couldn't get machines in there with overhead scrims and silks, and so we really had to time the particular times of the day that we could shoot in certain directions. So that was challenging in itself. And then the interior was this lovely old home, and it wasn't a museum. I can't remember what they used it for. Maybe events.
Yeah, like it was like a historic residence or something like that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Dan Hanna actually had this beautiful concept, bit of concept art that he had made for the interior of that room. And it was very lush, candles and warm lights and then daylight streaming through windows. And so as much as possible, that was one of the pieces of concept art I went, wow, I just love that artwork, and I really want to try and emulate what he has created in that artwork. And this is one of the processes that on a show like Percy is that you have mountains of concept art. Hades' Palace, here's some concept art for that. Medusa's Lair, here's some for that. And often you deviate from that concept art because as a cinematographer, you want to try something else or you want to do something a little different. But for Medusa's, for that particular room at the Emporium, I loved that artwork so much. I thought I really want to try and emulate that as closely as possible. So it was great that Dan had given me the key to the look of that particular space. Yeah.
Ooh, should we talk about Hades' palace or like all of the underworld then? Because
Let's go.
Going into episode 7,
Now
we're just in the underworld. Now you're just in straight up fantasy land. Like we're literally in hell. Were you able to like pop off a little bit more with those like kind of fantasy lighting tricks, or was there anything you were sort of able to like delve into a little bit deeper when it came to traveling through all those different sets?
Yeah, I mean, listen, episode 7 was very challenging. It was challenging for a number of reasons. One of which was the sets. What we were going to build, what was going to work photographically, what was going to be very challenging, what would work on the volume, what would work as a physical set. And luckily, where our stages were, they're called Mammoth stages in Burnaby in Vancouver. There's a part of that complex, and it was this huge space inside this warehouse. And we decided that we would build, I think there were 4 sets that we built there for the Underworld. There was the River Styx, there were the Forests of Asphodel, Tartarus, and the Desert of Souls. And there was the approach to Hades' Palace. And of course, we had to shoot this episode within a given time frame. So all these sets were built, not at one time, they were ongoing. We were actually shooting on one set while I was still building another. But we had this enormous stage in which to fit 4 or 5 of our locations. And so one of the challenges, for instance, I'll give you an example, was the Forest of Asphodel, where we used real tree trunks
Oh, wow.
for the main part of the forest. And then on the sides, and then I think it'd probably be about 80 meters by 30 meters. That was kind of like the area where the forest set was placed. And then on the outside of the forest, we had a painted backdrop. And the painted backdrop was a continuation of the forest. Now, when you stand in the middle of that forest and you look out, you point a camera out toward the painted backdrop, then the painted backdrop blended with the actual real forest. But if you were on the outskirts of that forest, then the painted backdrop becomes a painted backdrop. And so we had to be super careful with the way that we staged the action, that we had to put most of the action in the midst of that set, because the closer you got to the painted backdrop, the more you give the game away. And so the other thing that we had to do was introduce a lot of atmosphere, a lot of smoke into that set as well to blend the real tree trunks with the painted backdrop. There was real challenges there. Another big challenge was Tartarus and how to render Tartarus, and Tartarus being, it's an extension of it's within the Desert of Souls, and desert being desert, it's desert tends to look great when it has sun on it, a full sun, and it looks kind of flat and less interesting when it's an overcast sky. And the challenge here was that we're in the underworld and there is no sun. There is no pinpoint of light, right? It's a kind of a nondescript kind of sky, not nondescript, but light kind of emanates from the underworld in a way that, I don't know. Can you guys tell me where it comes from? I'm not entirely sure.
It comes from magic. It comes from magic, and Rick Riordan said so. Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. So the challenge there was, and this was the set that kind of would make me wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning in a cold sweat. While I was
how do we light the desert?
How the hell do we light the desert? But make it interesting. Now, the obvious way in the underworld is just it's an overcast sky and it's flatly lit, but it's not going to look great. So it was a matter of, and is it dark like Asphodel, and is it kind of dark and moody like the River Styx? And I just kept bumping on the feel of that. So in the end, I kind of pitched this idea that it wasn't a pinpoint of light like the sun, but it was a softer but much more directional type of light. So it's like, to put it in kind of film terms, it's a big lamp which is softened, right? So it becomes, it goes from, at a distance, a smaller source, and the smaller source will create deep shadows, to a larger source, but it's very directional. So that way, I could create contrast. But if you look at the sand, you'll never see a deep shadow, a hard shadow from sunlight. And and the other thing that I wanted to do is I didn't want it to be dark. I wanted it to feel brighter there, that it's a brighter kind of space, and introduce atmos again, and introduce particulate like sand into the air. And there was just so much of that that we could do physically, because it's dangerous blowing sand in, it gets in the actors' eyes, and it makes it really hard for them to perform. And the other thing with Tartarus, it wasn't a big set, by any stretch of the imagination, and almost every direction that we looked, that we were shooting offset, except if you just shot down into the sand. So we had to be kind of inventive. We had to bring in kind of boulders and rocks that we could shoot into. Because listen, if every shot you do has a visual effect component to it, it becomes super expensive. So we call them, free shots, freebies, the ones where you don't have a visual effects component to it. Should we talk about going from a physical set to a virtual set, the volume?
Absolutely.
We would love to hear about the volume.
We would love to hear about the volume, especially because I'm surprised, like you said, so many of those sets for the Underworld were with painted backdrops. And then obviously going into the interior of Hades Palace was definitely the volume, right?
That's right. So the only location that wasn't on a set was Hades Palace. That was shot on the volume. Shooting volume is very different to shooting on location or shooting a set. And it's a very steep learning curve. This was my first volume show. So
wow. I was going to ask if Miss Marvel used the volume, but that makes sense.
Yeah, not in Miss Marvel at all. There was no volume work in Miss Marvel. So this was my first foray into volume. And it's I call the volume a harsh mistress. Well, the volume can be a harsh mistress. It can be a brutal space. Unless you treat her well, it can be tough. So, but it's also a really rewarding and a really creative environment as well. So, for a cinematographer, there's a lot of kind of new things for us there where, on any one day you're doing the photography, you're responsible for the camera work, and you're responsible for the lighting of the set, but you also take part of the kind of production design elements on board as well, because from the get-go, over a number of weeks, you're designing the space. That comes from concept, and it comes from the production designer and what the showrunners want and what the script dictates. But you're putting a lot more work into the actual design, the particulars of the space itself and the environment. So, for instance, in Hades Palace, I had a lot of input into, the reflectivity of the walls and how dark the walls, how black they were, and also the clouds, the sky. How does the sky look? Whereas I was going to say, where's the sun? But there is no sun, of course, in Hades Palace.
Oh my gosh, Jules was waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning going, where's the sun in the underworld?
Oh my God, where's the sun on this goddamn? Yeah, that's it. So, and then on the day, so all these ideas are going into the pot. The VFX guys go and they're actually building the virtual space. And then on the day, there are so many elements that you can change. And that you need to change because it doesn't work for the shot. So, for instance, that part of the wall, I needed shifted, towards the left because I need an opening to the sky behind our players, because I want to motivate light from that direction. But not only motivate light, I want to actually be able to see the sky there. So I'm going to actually shift. I'm going to rotate the wall, and now the clouds. Let's look at the clouds. Are they moving? Okay, I want them to move a little faster than what they're doing. The opacity of that wall there, let's increase it, and then the reflectivity of the floor in the background. It's not kind of blending with our real floor. And
oh, wow.
It's a dance, but it's a dance that's got to be danced really quickly because you're always under time pressure. But all of a sudden you have all these other elements that you can manipulate and that you often need to manipulate.
Did you feel like God?
Did I feel like, at times, and other times I felt like the devil. And sometimes like a higher God would walk into my tent and like Dan Schatz and say, Jules, what are you doing with that particular thing there? And so then you realize that it's a pantheon of gods and yeah.
And we're in hell. And currently we are in hell.
Currently we're in hell because we're 2 hours behind schedule. And, and we need to get a wriggle on. It's a really interesting, rewarding, sometimes stressful environment in which to work. And the other thing is for the more technical people, I'm sure you have lighting people and photographers who've listened to your podcast,
sure,
and understand the vagaries of photography. But with our volume set, we had walls, and it was kind of shaped like a horseshoe. It was a horseshoe type shape, but we also had a ceiling on it, and the walls were 22 feet high. And then we had this ceiling. And so what it meant that if you were to put a car, for instance, you were to do a car driving shot, or for instance, we did some bus work, and you have things within the car, like a windscreen that ordinarily reflects the sky, then it reflects the sky on the volume, which is fantastic. And originally the idea came from, the Mandalorian. The Mandalorian had this kind of silver reflective helmet. And so they decided, listen, we need a ceiling because we're going to see everything reflected in the helmet, and it's going to be a mountain of visual effects work to kind of clean that up unless we have a ceiling. And that's where this idea for the ceiling for the volume kind of originated. But what that means for a cinematographer, okay, so the first time I walked onto the volume set, I looked at it and I looked up and I looked at that ceiling and I went, oh my God, look how close it is. It's only 22 feet.
Yeah.
I'm going to be fighting the inverse square law. It's a lighting thing, right? And what it's about is that often you just want your lights backed off. You want your lights, quite a distance away. And especially if it's something like you're emulating something like the sun, you want that light as far away as possible. Because every foot you get away from your light source, if it's a long way away, then you don't notice the difference in the drop-off in light. But if it's very close, like a lamp at a table, I've got say, 20-foot candles of light hitting my face if the lamp is 1 foot away. And now if I go 2 feet away, then I've got a quarter of that hitting me. And the rough equation, it's called the inverse square law. And my immediate thoughts were...
Inverse square, yeah.
The ceiling is just too close. My lights are going to be too close to the action. And it's it's one of the biggest challenges of the volume, if you have a ceiling, is that you have to overcome this problem of your lights just being often too close and it looking fake. And you've got to pull tricks out of your hat to kind of get around that really big issue. And it's a big issue. And so if I had my way, I would, for season 2, I'd say double the height of the walls and have a floating ceiling. So we only bring the ceiling in if we need the reflection, right? Otherwise, I have my own lights up there. But there's costs associated with that. So now for episodes 3 and 4, which we did a sequence in a bus and we did a sequence in a train, and they were both shot on the volume. So there was a part of that bus sequence was shot on a real location outside of Vancouver, but all the action within was shot on volume. Now, the plates, we call them plates, photographic plates, were real plates. So they were shot on a highway for the bus scene, and the other plates for the train sequence was shot on a proper train track with a camera mounted to a vehicle that could travel along that train track and do a 360-degree array of plates. Now, those plates need to be fixed and stitched together, and so they're then played on the volume screen. So where am I going with this? So the ceiling. Okay, so the ceiling is, once again, it just becomes part of the set in which you're shooting. So the Medusa's lair, it was a cave ceiling. Now, if I'm not seeing a part of the wall with my camera, then I can turn that part, anything that's off camera, I can turn it actually into my own lighting fixture in a way. So, for instance, Medusa's cave, we had real fire on set. So I had 4 cauldrons on set, and then within the walls of the LED screens, there were the virtual fires. Now, if I'm not actually seeing, say this 20-foot section of the right-hand side of the set, then I can put whatever we call it like a swatch or patch, whatever I design, I can put there, whether it be, like a warm light. I created these big fireballs, which in the end I didn't kind of use. And I wanted the flicker of the flame to play on the actors. And so I was thinking about putting those on the virtual wall and using that as a kind of a lighting source because it's off camera. And so the volume set becomes this super interesting, really handy, very challenging space in which you can do so many great lighting tricks and so many cool things, but it also has its challenges as well.
Knowing this is your first project on the volume, first of all, congratulations. I mean, it looks beautiful. Did you text anyone? Like, did you text any DP friends and you were like, what do I, like, do you have advice? Or like, what do I do about
What
the
do I
ceiling?
do?
Like,
That's it.
did you text Pierre at 3 a.m.? What do I do about the ceiling on the volume?
Yeah, well, Pierre, he was, I think, actually Pierre's first day on Percy Jackson shooting, the very day one of the shoot was the New York streets outside the Met. So he was in the volume on day one. But he had several months in which to test and like he went in there super prepped and did an amazing job. And this, I mean, one of the hardest things to do in volume is to be in a terrestrial world with the sun, and by that I mean on the streets of New York or on, say, Tatooine under a real sky with a real sun. That's the hardest thing that you can do, because you're dealing, as I said, you're fighting the inverse square law. The sun should be 93 million miles away, but it's only 22 feet away, right? So it's a really, really challenging thing to do. And I think it's the hardest thing to do is to be under a real sky. Whatever that sky may be, on Earth, under a blue sky with the sun up there, and the actors or your characters are getting hit by sunlight, and it's a really, really tricky and challenging thing to pull off. And so to that end, you actually try and avoid that kind of environment. So for Pierre in New York, outside the Met, there are a lot of tall buildings around, and so it's kind of blocking. It's blocking the sun. It's blocking the direct sunlight onto the characters and onto the set. That's the real set that you're shooting. And but still, it's a very challenging thing to pull off because of that problem of the ceiling just being so close to the action.
I have learned so much in the last 50 minutes. I feel like I just went to film school, or like I took a semester in lighting design.
I just want to know how many potential cinematographers I've actually turned off.
Oh, no.
Oh my God. I don't want to do that. That just sounds way too stressful.
They just don't want to work on the volume. They want to build sets.
Yeah.
We have to ask you just a little bit about the Poseidon and Sally scene in episode 7. That is just so beautiful. Carter, what's our question? Like, what do we want to know about it?
Well, let's talk about Toby Stephens, of course. I mean, what a legend.
Oh, what a beautiful man.
I don't even know if we can ask one question about that. We were watching that and we're so astounded by everything about it. Like, everything about it felt inevitable, but also like not obvious. Like the way that, for instance, like when Poseidon enters, the camera doesn't move for so long until they're already like 30 seconds into the conversation, and then you slowly like just pan out to reveal him. Yeah. What was interesting about shooting the scene? Like were there any decisions that you made as you were prepping it or shooting it where you were like, oh, we're making a choice here and this feels right?
I'm curious specifically if there were choices being made through the camera work to make us feel like we were in Sally's perspective, or that we were specifically tracking Sally's journey through these flashbacks, because we've been so much in Percy's journey and in Percy's head, and then this is very much like Sally's experience and Sally's story. And for the first time, we're seeing Sally without Percy in the past as she's having this conversation with Toby Stephens.
Yeah. I mean, one of the more important things that with camera work and as a cinematographer working with the director is point of view. Is it's whose point of view are you in, and it was very much had to be in Sally's point of view. That was really important for the scene and for the feel of it, and for the audience to connect with her. So if you break point of view or you leave point of view, it's harder for the audience to connect or keep that connection. Or so that was the first thing that it's very much in Sally's point of view. But the thing about the scene, I guess it had to be beautiful, and it had to be subtle, and it had to be emotional, and there was this thing of Percy's father comes into that space, and does Poseidon want to see Percy, and that whole play of that I guess that torment of a father wanting to connect with his son but not being able to, and the loneliness of Percy sitting across the way and not knowing what's going on with his mother and father, but it was everything, like it was subtlety was the kind of name of the game, and the beautiful but subtle lighting, the transition, before Poseidon comes in of the light kind of changing and getting darker and getting cooler and more blue, the rain outside, all these kind of these things are kind of that had to fit into, had to support the scene, but had to fit into his character of Poseidon, and it was it was a wonderful, beautiful, kind of poignant scene to shoot, and so always with these kinds of scenes, there's all this technical stuff kind of going on. There's lighting. It's like, okay, let's have a run through on the dimming of the light and the transition of the light, and okay, let's practice the camera move, and there's a point where you have to, and that's all kind of rehearsal, and then the actors come on set, and you've got to give them the space. Like that's one of the most important things as a cinematographer, and working with a director is giving the actors the space with which to work in, and to be able to work to get the best out of them, for a space in which they can become very emotional. It's often you've got to calm the crew down and go, okay, guys, let's chill and let the actors now do their thing. You have had all this time to set this up. Now it's their time. And we've got to be super respectful of that. And professional crews like the crew on Percy are super respectful of those moments, and they were just wonderful. So it's it's the kind of the dance between the technical, the creative, and then the performance, and everyone and everything has its place, but there's a moment where you just have to stop and let the actors do their thing, and they sure as hell pulled it off. So
that being a scene that is not anywhere in the books is such a massively big deal for the fandom. Like that one scene in that episode 7, like has really like changed the canon of Percy Jackson forever. And so Thank you for making it so beautiful that I've cried every time I've watched it, and I've seen it like 6 times now.
Well, then I guess we all did our work from director
Y'all did that.
to actors to gaffer, grip, costume, makeup, everyone. If they're having that kind of effect on you, Erica, then I guess we've had a good day at work. Yeah.
Oh, as a fan, I was greatly serviced. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. I mean, like we literally could talk to you for like 8 hours. You did so much intricate work on these episodes. I have to say, like, just as a statement of gratitude also for that shot of Percy and Annabeth lying perpendicular on the train. That I feel like has been in my dreams since I was a little kid, and getting to see that shot was chef's kiss.
Wow, that's cool.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Would you like to close us off with any advice you have to the 2 DPs who are listening to our podcast? Future lighting designers?
I guess follow your dream. If you want to be a DP, then go for it and just put everything into it. Everything into it. You've got to become kind of singularly focused. It's such a tough industry in many ways, and very kind of competitive. And I'd say that with any person wanting to be a director or a cinematographer or actor or anything, you've got to put everything into it and become kind of tunnel visioned in a way, and until you kind of break in and get there. And you just got to work really hard at it. But it is incredibly rewarding, and it's a wonderful industry to be a part of, and you meet so many fabulous creative people, and you get to work on some really awesome projects like Percy Jackson and the Olympians. So, but just go for it. Yeah. Follow your dream. Do it.
Heck yeah. I hope we get to do this again for season 2 of Percy Jackson.
Look forward to talking to you guys again.
All right. We appreciate you so much for being here, and we will talk to y'all listeners next time.
Great. Thanks, Erica. Thanks, Carter. Great to talk to you.
Yes, thank you so much.